Sleepers, we talked about him a little bit already, but Goddard for the Eagles against the Giants. They've given up a lot of points to the tight end position, so it's a good matchup for them as well. Excuse me. And the one to watch out for. So this is one that typically he's a start for me. Is Janu Smith this week? Go against the Colts. He's one to watch, so you want to be careful of that matchup. If you have another option, maybe think about it. But he's definitely one that I'd watch out for. So back to our questions. Let's see, flex. I like that. This one actually. This is a good question. Who is my flex? Dalvin Cook, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, DK Metcalf, Stephon Diggs, Tyler Lockett, Derrick Henry, James Robinson, DeAndre Hopkins. So there's probably three that you kind of, right, Stephon Diggs, but you probably drafted Stephon Diggs pretty high. Not first round high, but not low. The next one is probably James Robinson, very high. All in your leagues. So he is fourth among all running backs in fantasy this year. He's ninth in overall kind of flex wide receiver running backs. Ninth, James Robinson. So in terms of, as you know, last week I was doing kind of the value MVP, not just, it's easy to say, well, Alvin Kamara has the most points. He's your MVP. No, because Alvin Kamara went in the first round, probably first 4 or 5 picks. James Robinson is the MVP because, one, he's on a terrible team, and two, you got him, dirt cheap. So he's definitely your MVP at the flex position. The next question that we have is, let's see. Jalen Reagor. What's his value now that he's returning to the Eagles lineup? All right. So he's an interesting one because so what's going to happen is he's not going to be the number one target, I don't think. He'll have some nice games. It'll probably be kind of frustrating for you because he'll have a lot of boom and bust games. So his value is probably flex. T. Higgins or Curtis Samuel. All right. So I don't like the Bengals offense as much as I like what the Panthers are starting to do now with Curtis Samuel. So they're really starting to figure out what to do with him. And I think that is kind of the key to why I pick Curtis Samuels over T. Higgins. I think T. Higgins is really good, but I think with Tyler Boyd, kind of that Bengals defense, T. Higgins is going to be very matchup dependent as well, right? Like this week, I wouldn't start him. But Curtis Samuel, they're starting to use him, in the running game a little bit. They're starting to find, gadget plays and ways to get him the ball in space. And I think that's really important. So if I'm assessing the value of those two, I'm going with Curtis Samuel. All right. We'll just see. Any other questions before we jump into the next? All right. So the next part we're going to do is just take a look back before we end the show at last week's top performers. So we had in the quarterback position, the top three were Kyler Murray with 37.92 points. Beautiful. Josh Allen with 36 and Patrick Mahomes with 30.88. So those are your top three QBs. Running back, Delvin Cook. Typically when a running back specifically has a big game, he follows it up the next week with either a really bad game or a so-so game. But he came with back-to-back big weeks at 37.2 points last week. I know you don't want to do this, but you might be able to steal a running back one and wide receiver one if you have Delvin Cook, because his matchups the rest of the way look tough, and especially in the playoffs, like fantasy playoffs. So if you can kind of sell high on Delvin Cook, I know it sounds a little crazy, but see what you can get for him, because I think you can probably take advantage of some of the people in your league who seen what he's done the last 2 weeks. Christian McCaffrey, he came back, but I think he's gone again with 27.1. And then Kalen Balaj of the Chargers, 14.4. So that was a surprise. At the wide receiver, 2 names that you pretty much thought were going to be there, and one that I'm sure you didn't. Tyreek Hill, 24.1. Devontae Adams with 23.3. And then Brashad Perryman with 101 yards and 2 touchdowns to give him 22.1 points. So big game for him for the, other than the last couple of minute loss to the Jets, a surprising game by the Jets last week against the Patriots. And then at tight end, Travis Kelce had 15.9, 159 yards. Irv Smith Jr. with 10 receptions and 2 touchdowns for the Vikings. And we mentioned earlier, one of our waiver wire kind of streamer tight ends, Jimmy Graham with 11.5 points, 55 yards and a touchdown. And those are your top performers in fantasy last week. Again, if you have any questions, send them to Anthony K at sportsfluent.com, or check out sportsfluent.com for all your fantasy news. Until next week, are you fluent?